Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor to speak here. As you know, at COP26 last year, Vietnam announced that it would take stronger measures to reduce greenhouse gas to achieve net zero emission by 2050. Vietnam also joined Global Methane Pledge and some other initiatives. You may ask what Vietnam have done since last COP26 and how Vietnam turned its commitment into action, how we turn word in action. I can say that we are guided by very strong leadership from the government and enjoy participation of society, private sector, support from international community. Right after COP26, the National Committee for Implementation of COP26 commitments was established and chaired by Prime Minister. Some important policies have been approved since the last few months, including the National Strategy on Climate Change up to 2050, second updated NDC, and many others. I can say that both the updated NDC and as well as the climate change strategy include methane as a subject to do emission reduction. To implement the global methane pledge, Vietnam carry out a national inventory methane emission. The results show that 60% of national methane emission come from agriculture, 24% from waste sector, and 14% from energy sector in 2020. Based on the results of the inventory, a national action plan for reducing methane emission was developed and approved by the government on the 8th of August. The plan is to mobilize effort for reducing overall methane emission from cultivation, animal husbandry, solid waste management, wastewater treatment, and oil and gas extraction, coal mining, and fossil fuel consumption. By 2030, reducing at least 30% below 2020 level with domestic resources and international support, and with annual assessment and reports. Regarding to agricultural sector, Vietnam is rice production country. However, most of the people working in this field are from small households and small business with very low income. Reducing methane from agriculture not only help to reduce the national greenhouse gas emission, but also provide better technology to increase production and to improve the life condition of the people working in the sector. It is therefore the reduction of methane in agricultural sector as well as other sectors is an opportunity but also challenging for Vietnam. So cooperation and support are needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Tan. And let me now turn to Joe Puri from the International Fund for Agricultural Development, who will announce an exciting new partnership with the United States to provide support for developing countries to advance methane mitigation and agricultural resilience with smallholder farmers. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Rick. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, ministers. Such a privilege for me to be here. On behalf of President Lario, myself, and the staff of EFAD, I think what we want to first say is that we very much appreciate the collaboration, the support of the US government to the International Fund for Agricultural Development in really thinking about low methane and the way it synergizes with our current portfolio. We know that methane reduction is still regarded as the single most effective strategy to reach low greenhouse gas emissions overall while yielding core benefits for public health as well as for agricultural productivity at the same time. For just transitions, methane reduction, given its proximity to sectors that determine livelihoods for the poorest, is really critical. If we leave methane behind, we risk detonating a ticking climate time bomb. At the International Fund for Agricultural Development, we recognize that cutting methane emissions will have a big impact in the short run, as well as buy the planet valuable time to meet its climate targets. Our organization's mandate focuses on small-scale farmers and agriculture. And till now, we have found that 80% of our overall portfolio has focused on livestock, on rice, and has the potential to really contribute in critical ways to methane reduction. We are therefore very excited about the potential of working together with the US government as well as many of our partners, including the Green Climate Fund, FAO, the Global Dairy Platform, and the Global Methane Hub on this. As part of the Global Methane Pledge Partnership, we're excited to work and to prioritize methane mitigation in upcoming IFAD projects currently in the pipeline. These projects are valued at an approximate $500 million and have the potential to reduce methane to what are often considered methane-emitting activities such as livestock, paddy rice production, and many others. IFAD is committed to building, identifying, and learning lessons in reducing agricultural methane and applying these methods within the context of IFAD's goals to help vulnerable rural communities to be far more resilient, improving their ability to produce food and boost overall economic development. As previously said, we are also committed to developing a large 4-country program in Eastern Southern Africa with the Green Climate Fund, with FAO, and many others, where we can bring in additionally and leverage $400 million that we are expecting from private sector actors as well. The partnership with the US is an opportunity for us to lead globally in addressing climate change at that midpoint between mitigation and adaptation. Indeed, many farmer-led programs focus on increased productivity, can achieve economic development, adaptation, and methane mitigation goals simultaneously. We look forward to our collaboration. Together, we are bigger, better, smarter in curating and delivering larger impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and so good to see us mobilizing the hundreds of millions and into the billions to get this work done together. Really appreciate the partnership. Let me now turn to Carolina Urmaneta, who's the Waste and Circular Economy Program Director at the Global Methane Hub, who will announce new actions in the waste sector. Carolina.
Thanks, Rick, and thanks for this excellent panel. Waste is responsible for 20% of the global methane emissions from human activities, thanks. And dramatically scaling up efforts to reduce these emissions can also deliver important health and economic development benefits. The DMP pathway on waste will focus initially on reducing emissions across the solid waste value chain, from upstream source to downstream disposal sites. And what we are talking about here, well, this pathway considers 5 initial components, and today we are on the solution day and we are at COP of implementation. So let me talk about these components and what are we doing on these components. The first component is enhancing measurement and tracking. And for this, we have great news. We have Carbon Mapper that will use airborne and space-based instruments to develop a global waste sector methane baseline assessment for over 10,000 landfills and dam sites. We are going to work also with RMI and CATF that will develop an open source waste methane assessment platform with waste sector information to drive methane action. And we're going to hear about IDB that is going to develop great efforts also here with Latin America. When we talk about waste, we are talking about local governments. So the second component is scaling up subnational action. We have the scale methane a new initiative of subnational climate action leaders exchange that will support accelerate subnational action on waste methane mitigation. And this work will complement the pathway towards zero waste that was joined by 30 cities at the October 2022 C40 summit. The third component on this pathway is reducing food loss and food waste. Because when we talk about waste, we're talking also about food system. And for that, we're going to work on food loss. We are going to have a partnership with the Global Food Banking Network that will launch a new effort to quantify and track food banking methane mitigation. And also, we heard about this great announcement with Canada. We are going to work on an organic waste management accelerator that is going to work on 4 Caribbean countries and on 6 South American countries in order to have pre-feasibility studies to implement the methane mitigation project. We are also going to hear a great initiative here from IDB, and we also have this new USAID Food Loss and Waste Partnership facility that will scale efforts in Bangladesh, Kenya, Nepal, Niger, Nigeria, and Tanzania. The fourth component is regional platforms. Here we're going to see how collaboration and coordination is so important and that we need this for implementation. So we're going to hear a great initiative from the IDB for Latin America. And last but not least, because this is so important, the fifth component in this pathway is mobilizing investment. These several initiatives outlined above will focus on removing barriers to scaling up investment in waste methane mitigation. And these initiatives count with the support of the Canadian government, the United States government, the African Development Bank, the IDB, the Graham Foundation, and also the Global Methane Hub. The Global Methane Hub is a philanthropic effort to support the signatories and potential signatories of the Global Methane Pledge to meet the pledge and go beyond that. And for that, we drive coordination and collaboration. And I have also good news because we are already working with China, and we are going to support them with this methane mitigation plan that they have announced, with working together with 8 different NGOs to support this plan. So thank you very much, and happy to be here with you, because the Global Methane Pledge and the last COP was the first stage. Today we're talking about the second step, where we have pathway. Then we need to go to MRB, to monitoring, reporting, and verification. So I think we have great news today. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you to the Global Methane Hub. Over $350 million in grant funding from a group of over 20 philanthropies that is clearly getting to work, getting this done with partners. Great partner for so many of you who are trying to join us in cutting methane across these different pathways. Let me invite now Helene Mirovic, Head of Climate Change, IDB Invest, to close us out strong.
Thank you so much. I guess I'm the last one, so I have a difficult task here after excellent speakers. But let me tell you from IDB Group, especially from IDB Invest, the private sector arm, we're honored to be joining the Global Methane Pledge, as we see this work crucial in the next decade to stay within the 1.5 degrees, as most of the speakers before me have mentioned. Our actions focus mainly on 3 pillars. We know that the climate finance destined to methane is less than 2%. So how do we increase it? One, we promote and include methane reductions within the investments in Latin America and the Caribbean. But we also have to generate knowledge, and we have to generate products that accompany those investments. And finally, we need to develop frameworks and guidelines for our own teams, especially linking to our commitment to be 100% Paris-aligned from 2023. In the context of the waste pathway that we are mentioning right now, there are 3 initiatives that I would like to highlight. First, the regional waste hub that Carolina was just mentioning is to standardize the data under the vision of the circular economy. We know that we need data to promote action, but we see a lot of different methodologies and different availability of data. If we tackle these, then we can engage with private sector clients and governments to do projects that basically focus on methane reduction. The second program that I want to talk to you about quickly is the Too Good to Waste. It's a facility to include methane reduction in public sector initiatives to basically seize the opportunity that it was mentioned before in the panel. The third point is to basically account within our investment how much of the GHG emission reductions that we are supporting actually are linked to methane. This is critical to be able to have a baseline and then to use this as KPIs for the companies to be able to use innovative instruments such as sustainability-linked bonds or sustainability-linked loans to move private capital to this area. We look forward to this collaboration together across all members in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the collaboration from learning with all of you, because this way we are going to be able to move from commitments to implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. And we're running out of time, so I will be very brief in closing us out. And I want to echo the challenge that Special Envoy Kerry and Executive Vice President Timmermans gave to all of us, which is next year when we all meet here at COP28, not here, but in UAE, we come with every country that's part of the pledge with a national action plan, and that methane is strongly represented in everyone's NDC, and that we have mitigation projects and policies underway that makes the second year of the Global Methane Pledge even more to celebrate. And with that, I thank all of the panelists, all of the ministers, and all of you for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful night and safe travels back whenever you make it home. Thank you.
Government's intention is to electrify public transport vehicles with focus on high occupancy buses. So implementing this policy framework will require a review of existing legislations and the introduction of new ones to ensure policy coherence and relevance, combined with developing and implementing a communication strategy to create awareness and build confidence in EVs. It also requires the development of standards for electric vehicles and related charging infrastructure, among others. But the emergence of EVs has created a lot of interest in Ghana. Over the past few years, we have seen more than double the number of hybrid to full electric vehicles in our transport landscape. there is also growing potential from the private sector in the deployment of charging infrastructure. What is even more encouraging is the drive by some oil marketing companies who have started deploying, retooling, and redeveloping their fuel filling stations to include EV charging facilities. Despite these positive developments, there is an urgent need for standardization and certification guidelines to govern EV charging systems, installations, and use. Other critical areas that also require attention is the manpower development, particularly for artisans and garages who either to have been servicing ICE vehicles, and how to ensure a smooth transition. So I would like to conclude by saying that going forward, we should leverage on our collective experiences and resources to ensure inclusive transition, particularly within the context of developing economies. It is important that countries collaborate more to build capacities through peer-to-peer exchanges, resource mobilization, and technology transfer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the comments. And we'll just move to, one comment each, given the time. I'm sorry for that. But really great to hear your experience and also what you think is needed for sure for the region to ensure a just and inclusive transition. And I'd love to reflect on that from the panelists here in terms of, how some of these things that have been launched today are really going to support that. The Rapid Response Facility, the Zero Emission Vehicles Emerging Markets campaign, and why you're participating in that. What do you hope to achieve from that? So from a business perspective first, perhaps. Adam, Uber is showing great leadership in this space and looking at how you can really be part of the transition. And I'd just love to hear more from you about where you see this going. What are your ambitions and aims, and what do you hope to achieve this year? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angie. Thank you to the UN Climate Champions for picking this up. Thank you to the UK government, Minister Stewart, for the leadership last year to create the ZEV Declaration, which we were so honored to be a part of and sign. We think this is critical. We want to be the cleanest platform for mobility in the world, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's good for our investors, it's good for our users, and it's good for the communities and cities where they use and enjoy our product. So to do that, we committed to reaching complete zero-emission service on Uber. That means 100% of rides in EVs, battery EVs, in micromobility or on public transport by 2030 in the US, Canada, and in Europe. And by 2040, in every market that we operate around the world. That's 70 plus countries around the world. So to do that, we want to engage the 5 million drivers who engage with our platform every day as an earning opportunity. And so for us, we're asking the question, what would it look like to move working people to the front of the clean energy transition line? They're not normally in front of that line. And so I ask you to think about when you get in the taxi to go back to your hotel or the bus, to think about that driver, put yourself in their shoes. What would it take to help them make the transition where EVs are a shared asset and an earning opportunity? That's how we're thinking about it. So we put 800 million, we pledged 800 million would be available to drivers over the next couple of years by 2025 to help hundreds of thousands make the transition to ZEV. We're seeing great progress from this in the US, Canada, and Europe, where already 37,000 drivers are using zero-emission vehicles on our platform today. It's the largest all-electric ride-sharing platform outside of China. They're doing around 20 million trips a quarter. That's 20 million opportunities to have a conversation about zero-emission vehicles, 20 million clean energy transactions in local economic development. But of course, as we look abroad, we have work to do. It's hard enough to help a driver, a working person in London, make the switch to EV. It's hard enough to help a working driver in California make the switch. And now as we look abroad, it's so important that we partner with industry colleagues like KPMG, like LeasePlan, Hitachi, and others. It's so important that we work with governments because this is clearly to us something that we cannot do on our own. So we are so honored to be part of the Zero Emission Vehicle Emerging Markets Initiative. Thank you very much to Mr. Schuler and the US government. Thank you to Minister Stewart and the UK government for the leadership here and for the World Business Council on Sustainable Development to create a platform. We've got 20 pilots live in markets like India and Latin America. And our they're pilot scale, however. We need to do work to understand what works in those pilots and what we can do to scale. And we're so looking forward to engaging with our colleagues here and with the rest of the Zero Emission Vehicle Emerging Markets Initiative to identify what's possible at scale to help working people around the world make a shift to zero emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic. If I could turn to you, Richard, please, just from your perspective, the WBCSD's involvement, how do you see this moving in 2023, your key priorities, engaging more businesses and bringing those pilots to scale? What would be your key takeaways that we can take some learnings from today?
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, it's a real honour to be here representing the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. For any of you that don't know the organisation, it represents more than 200 companies that are committed to strive to be leaders in sustainability. And the WBCSD is proud to be a partner in the ZEV Transition Council and in particular to be co-chairing this initiative for zero emission vehicles into emerging markets. I think others have encapsulated the challenge as neatly as anyone could do. To my mind, it's simply put that if we are going to keep alive, staying within 1.5 degrees, which personally I am absolutely determined we must, then we need to get to the position by 2030 that more than 60% of new vehicle sales globally are zero emission vehicles. And we have heard very eloquently, in particular from Albert earlier, the challenge of emerging markets and developing markets, where depending on the particular region, we're going to see economic growth powering between a doubling and a quadrupling of demand for vehicles in those markets. That's why this particular initiative is so critically important. I suggest the place to begin is by acknowledging the strength of the starting point. We have all the technology we need to do this. We have enormous commitments from the supply chain to invest. From the WBCSD members itself, more than $50 billion already committed to invest in the supply chain of the transport transition. We have public finance available from the multilateral banks and from certain jurisdictions, and we have a huge amount of private finance which is desperately keen to invest in this transition. And we have some really, really great examples, such as ones from Ghana, of public-private partnerships already entered into in order to speed this transition up. And on top of all that, you don't need to scrape around to find all of this great stories and those great examples, because today the World Business Council for Sustainable Development published this report, Financing Charging Infrastructure, that was the result of 5 workshops held last year that KPMG helped run in partnership with WBCSD that brought together private sector actors, financial providers and public sector organisations in 5 regions around the world to try and crack this. So what do we need to do now in order to accelerate the transition? For me, quickly, 3 things. Firstly, we heard that 60% of governments have not yet set a target for zero emission vehicle transition. We need those remaining 60% of governments to do so, so that all of the actors involved in this know what we're aiming for together, because that will unleash the power of organisations like Uber and KPMG and others to do everything that we possibly can. Secondly, we need to get into really intensive dialogues that bring together the private sector supply chain and the financial community and those governments in order to work out specifically what needs to be done. And the great thing about this initiative, I believe, is its commitment to come back to COP28, having done those dialogues, and WBSSD being a key participant in bringing those players together, to come back to COP28 having handshakes around concrete agreements to drive this forward as fast as possible. And finally, we need to, as you've already referenced, scale up the pace of investments. We need to find those really good examples of where this has worked in countries like Ghana, and we need to replicate those in other jurisdictions as fast as possible. That, for my mind, is the route to getting the scale and the speed of the transition that we need to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And WBCSD and all of the organisations involved in WBCSD are committed to be on the front line of all of that effort. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm conscious that we'll need to be making our closing remarks in the next few minutes because Minister Stewart will need to be getting to the next session. So we'll need to keep just the last round very brief. Sorry, Tim. Thank you so much for all the support of the ICCT. If you could briefly just tell us a little bit about the Rapid Response Facility. What do you hope to achieve by COP28? And any key takeaways from what you've heard today in relation to how we're going to be supporting the global transition to zero-emission vehicles, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Angie. First, I just want to say that ICT is privileged to be a partner in the Accelerating to Zero Coalition and a supporter of the ZEV Transition Council. I think both efforts really showcase the ways international collaboration across different stakeholders can really drive the transition forward. I just wanted to mention some research that the ICT did for the ZEV Transition Council that was published earlier this year. In an analysis, we tried to look at the emissions reductions that could be delivered by an ambitious yet feasible transition to zero-emission vehicles globally. And in that analysis, we found that such a global transition could deliver emissions reductions that would align the road transport sector on a pathway in alignment with the Paris Agreement goals. But the key outcome of that study, outside of that optimistic conclusion, is that this truly needs to be a global transition in order to reach those targets. So we heard from Albert and reiterated by many of the speakers here today that there's now emerging a risk for a two-track transition. If that's the way things proceed, then it becomes harder and harder to meet our climate goals through a transition to zero-emission vehicles. That transition not only delivers on the climate goals, but also delivers significant benefits to urban air pollution problems throughout the world. So we're not only talking kind of the long-term goals to address climate change, but also the very near-term goals to save people's lives today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So I've had the privilege as the ICT's representative to the ZEV Transition Council to participate in many of the international assistance task force dialogues that Minister Stewart mentioned in his remarks. And as part of those dialogues, we heard from over 40 countries about some of their key challenges and needs when it comes to the ZEV transition. So to highlight a few of those, one was to navigate technical assistance landscape, and the second was to access early stage support quickly. So not taking years to develop projects, but to have opportunities to get questions and needs addressed in a more timely manner. So the Rapid Response Facility that's being announced today very much is designed to address some of those key challenges that we learned about through those dialogues. So the facility is a mechanism to coordinate the technical assistance landscape and provide, as the name very clearly states, rapid response to kind of emerging and short-term needs from emerging markets and developing economies to get them on the pathway to the ZEV transition. So just to keep things brief here, I wanted to just say, kind of looking forward over the next year, ICT is very much looking forward to working with our partners in the ZEV Transition Council to develop the framework for the Rapid Response Facility and really launch an effective mechanism to coordinate this support to EMDs. And the aim is to work closely with the International Assistance Task Force that has been set up at the ZEV Transition Council, where we include many of the folks in the room today are members of the task force, and really represents a great collaboration and global expertise on transportation and zero-emission vehicles. So we very much look forward to working closely with those partners to deliver support coming in through the Rapid Response Facility. And just in closing, to connect the two, I mean, I think we at the Accelerating to Zero Coalition have seen the commitments being made. So we have over 11 emerging market and developing economy country signatories to the declaration who have shown their commitment to a ZEV transition. And now the Rapid Response Facility and the International Assistance Task Force can help to deliver on those commitments and take that path forward. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for all the leadership and the commitment that we've seen today from the countries, from all of the private sector and initiatives that are involved in this great effort. Sorry, we have to wrap up now. I would love to invite you to further zero-emission vehicle sessions happening in the Business Pavilion of Egypt, where we'll hear more private sector voices that are behind the A to Z coalition. But now I would just like to invite Minister Stewart to make some closing remarks. I'll give him the microphone as the podium is taken for the Secretary General's final closing. Oh, you have one. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
No, I don't think it's working. Just to thank you all so very much and celebrate the work that's gone on, the support that you can see, making sure that this really does get driven forward. So I think we're making great progress. There's so much more to do. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And Angie, well chaired. Thank you so much.